Magnus Carlsen is on fire as he managed to win his first 3 games at the European Club Cup against quite reasonable opposition, just crushing grandmasters like they're total patzers. In round 4, he has a very serious opponent, Vincent Keymer, Germany's #1, 27-17 rated. And recently in Baku at the World Cup, they had a very entertaining match, which Magnus only managed to win in the tiebreak. This time, they are playing in a team event. Magnus Carlsen playing with the white pieces against Vincent. And Magnus plays the move 1e4, c5. It's a Sicilian knight f3, d6. And Magnus, the day before against Russian Grandmaster Alexei Sarana, he played here the move bishop c4. Quite a surprise just to avoid a theoretical battle. Now, against Vincent Keymer, he goes for the move d4. C takes d4, knight takes d4. It's the open Sicilian. Knight f6, knight c3. And we have a Sicilian Najdorf. Bishop c4 played. And that's not the most common move, but it used to be a very popular and particularly a sharp line against this Najdorf. Nowadays, it's not often seen because it's not considered to be really sharp, but Magnus is giving his own touch to it. And of course, that's what we like to see. Magnus has his own ideas, just wants to get a playable position and goes for the move a4, preventing black from ever carrying out this pawn move b7, b5. Bishop e7, castling kingside, and so does black. Bishop e3. And we have a position with kings castled at the same side. This doesn't look very aggressive, but after queen c7, queen e2 protecting the bishop. Looks like Magnus has completed its development by move 10. Everything is looking fine. Bishop d7 was played here. In a lot of cases, you would expect the knight to come to c6 immediately. But bishop d7 played, and that gives white the opportunity to fix the pawn formation on the queen side with the move a5. This is a nice idea, which is often seen in a lot of positional lines in the Sicilian Najdorf. As you're clamping down on the b6 square, you're planning to move your knight probably to b3, and then at some point the bishop can definitely come to b6. I think black is okay here if he plays a move like knight c6, and well, in such a case you can go for the exchange of knights and then get your bishop to b6. This bishop is a little bit annoying. The queen has to go away, and black is a little bit passive. Maybe white is having some ideas to exert some pressure on the d file. But it's a game. Definitely anything can happen here. But let's go back to this moment, because Vincent Keymer didn't play the move knight c6. He went for this move, knight g4. And that's an interesting idea. You're attacking the bishop on e3, and the idea is that if you take on g4, then the queen is no longer defending its own bishop. There's queen takes c4, black regains the piece, and in fact this was even seen in a grandmaster game, Ibadov against Bernatsky, played earlier this year. But knight g4, this is always a little tricky, like the bishop is hanging if the queen moves away, but white has a very strong move here, which was overlooked by Keymer. Magnus, very alert. In such a quiet positions, he also spots every tactical opportunity. And he goes for the move knight f5. That's a move which could have easily been overlooked by many strong other players as well. What is going on here with this knight f5? We know that knights can be sacrificed on f5 or d5. These ideas are very common in a lot of Sicilians, but not in such quiet type of positions. Let's try to understand what the idea is. If you take that knight on f5, the d5 square becomes available for the knight, attacking the queen. You're also threatening to regain the bishop by taking on e7. Queen goes back to d8 in that case, but then the bishop comes to b6, exactly as we have been predicting. The queen got to keep the bishop defended, goes to e8, but then it's knight c7, forking the queen and the rook. If the queen goes away, then it's knight takes a8. White is an exchange down, and the knight cannot be trapped. It will easily come back to the c7 square, which means that white is just big material up. That shows that the knight cannot be taken, and well, that's a big problem. The knight is a very annoying piece, threatening to take the bishop. So bishop goes to f6, but now the queen comes under threat. Bishop b6 is played, and the queen has to be careful. Also got to keep the pawn on d6 defended. So therefore the queen goes to c6. And what is the knight gonna do? That's a big question. Magnus thought, let's just go back with the knight to d4 to attack the queen. It's a very typical Magnus move. More tactical type of players, they would consider some sharper continuations. And a move like bishop d5 is a spectacular move. As you try to force black to take, and after taking back with a pawn, the queen is under threat, and on the next move you can take that knight on g4. It's a very tactical position, but understandably Magnus doesn't want to go for it. He wants to retain control, positional sound advantage. Knight d4 is a good move. If you would take back with the bishop, white recaptures, of course. So the knight is in trouble. You're threatening to take it, and the queen takes c4. It's going to be checkmate on g7. If you go away with a knight, let's say to e5, it's bishop b3, and the knight is badly placed on e5, and so the knight on b8 and the queen on c6 as well. White has a very powerful attack coming up. Therefore, after knight d4, Keymer played here the move queen c8. Now the bishop goes back to b3, so that the queen can now safely win the knight on g4 without worrying about this bishop. It's now safe on b3. Knight e5 played, rook ad1, and we see that the pawn on d6 is a potential problem for black. How to continue developing here? Well, Keymer played here the move bishop to d8. Understandable, as you would like to get rid of this bishop. Just I would like to show you one line. As when I was looking at this game, I was thinking knight bc6 is a much more logical continuation. But then f4 is a very annoying move, and the knight is in trouble. For instance, if you take on d4, I'm going to take with the bishop, and after the knight goes away, I'm going to take on f6, and you have a lot of problems regarding your king. Also, the pawn on d6 is vulnerable. Just you cannot take right away because of queen c5. It's a double attack. But you can prepare that idea by playing queen e3. So you're guarding this diagonal. The pawn on d6 can be taken. If you protect it, now white is shifting the attention with f5. And this looks absolutely crushing. With the queen coming to h6, a rook lift can be implemented soon as well. So there are clear drawbacks getting the knight out to c6. Anyway, let's get back to the game. Bishop d8 was played. And now white plays f4. Continuing the attack against the knight. The knight went to c6. And white plays f5. Very nice idea and very typical for the systems with a bishop on c4. You would like to challenge that pawn on e6. If the pawn on e6 is gone, the bishop will increase in strength, and also the d5 square will become accessible for the knight, for instance. Bishop takes bishop, pawn recaptures, knight takes d4, rook takes d4, and white is having a big lead in development, is attacking the pawn on d6. Queen c5 is played, pinning the rook on d4, queen f2, unpinning the rook. And it's very important that the pawn on b6 cannot be taken now, because it runs into f takes e6. White gets exactly what it wants. After pawn recaptures, it's checkmate on f8. And here we see that black's rook on a8 is not helping its colleague on f8. If you do recapture with the bishop, it's bishop takes e6. And the bishop can't be taken as the rook is still unprotected. So queen takes b6 is not possible. E takes f5 was played in the game. White just recaptures, and this pawn is very strong, as well as all the other pieces. Beautiful harmony between white's pieces. If you would take the pawn now, then the knight comes in to d5 with an attack on the queen. If queen goes away, then it's time to play f6, opening up black's king side. You're threatening to take on g7. If you ever go for something like g6, queen f4 with the idea to get the queen to h6 with mating threats on g7, it's totally game over in that case. So instead, bishop c6 was played to control the d5 square, preventing a knight from coming there, but f6 cannot be stopped. White is about to open up the f-file. Knight d7 was played. F takes g7, king takes. And now very nice move as bishop d5 was played. Magnus wants to get rid of that bishop on c6, which is probably black's best piece, taking away squares. And by putting the bishop on d5, white is planning to get its knight to e4 without allowing black to capture it with a bishop from c6. For instance, if you take with the bishop on d5, it's knight takes d5 and it's just a free attack. Note that the pawn on b6 can never be taken because of a queen coming to f6. If king goes away, it's knight e7 with beautiful checkmating pattern. Just an illustration of how bad black's position in fact is. So we see the f6 square is really weak. The queen is looking for a way to come to that square, which means that the knight from d7 can't really move here. Therefore, the move played by Keymer is understandable. He played the move f5 to give the rook and the knight some more possibilities to cover the f6 square. But of course, it's a very ugly and weakening move. Bishop takes bishop was played. Queen recaptured on c6. And even though there are no immediate threats, you can play, for instance, the move rook fd1, attacking the pawn weakness on d6, which is very difficult to defend. If you do so with rook f6 was not played in the game, because the knight will come to d5. There are a lot of problems. If rook goes to e6, it's knight c7 with knight fork number 1. If the rook goes to g6, then it's knight fork number 2, attacking the queen and the rook. And if the rook goes to h6, it's also knight e7, attacking the queen. If queen goes away, the knight captures on f5, forking the king and rook. So here we see all the deficiencies of black's position being exploited. Therefore, in the game, rook f6 was not played. Queen takes b6 on the board, hoping that if you take, the queens can be exchanged. But white instead played here the move knight e5. Very strong move. The pawn on b2 can be taken, but if you do that, it's knight c7 with another knight fork, attacking the rook. If the rook goes away, you have knight e6 with another knight fork. We see that after playing that move f7, f5, this is a very juicy square for the knight. It can nicely be taken advantage of by white. Queen d8 was played in the game to cover the e7 square, but now the knight comes to f4, threatening another huge knight fork, winning the queen, the rook, or just the game. And here black just resigned. His position was no longer attractive to keep looking at. If you cover this square e6 with rook f6, it's knight h5, another knight fork, winning the exchange at least. If you protect it with the queen, then just rook takes d6 is game over. With an attack on the knight, you're renewing the threat of knight e6 with a knight fork. So Magnus Carlsen just crushes Vincent Keymer in only 29 moves. And you can say that, well, that was just one blunder, this move knight g4 in the opening. But things were not that simple. But the way Magnus wins his games, finish it off, it's very, very instructive, very convincing technical performance. Winning another game, bringing him to 4 out of 4, winning 9 rating points along the way. So virtual on the live rating list, he is now 28-48. He's getting back to his all-time high. Can he make it 2900? That's what he announced a long time ago. That is his dream. It's maybe not realistic, but what do you think, guys? Can he make it? Can he win all his remaining games in this tournament? That's, of course, challenge number 1 for him. Let's just see what's going to happen in the next few days. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and we keep following Magnus, his best games, of course. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.